Hello all you shining stars, and welcome to my channel Shining Star Soup. In today's video, it's going to be a story time video. And basically I just wanted to talk a little bit about a couple of stories in my past that have been centered around death. Now, that's my little disclaimer. If you are, well, you should have been able to tell by the headline and my little icon that about what this story time is going to be about. And it's a bit hard to talk about, but death is very real. It happens to all of us. When you really think about it, it does put things in perspective. Everybody has their different beliefs. Everybody has faith, different religions and all that. And I'm not going to get into any of that just because, in my mind, to each its own. Whatever you need to cope with something as very real can be a bit intimidating, can be a little bit scary, can provoke feelings of pain and hurt and loneliness. For me, what really helped me actually put death into perspective was a series called Dead Like Me. I do recommend it. It kind of puts comedy relief on what it is, what death is. And anyway, if you get a chance, definitely see it. I think it's really great. Alright, so the first real topic feeling about death that hit me was when I was about 5 years old. My grandmother was murdered in my grandma on my mom's side, so my mom's mom was murdered. And the thing is, it happened when I was 5 years old, and a child's memory, I have a bad memory as is to begin with, but the story from what I remember is that my grandmother was working in a hotel in Edmonton, and I think she got kind of in the wrong place at the wrong time. She walked in on a murder that had already happened, and the guy that killed her hid behind the door and strangled her with a coat hanger. Now, like I said, this happened when I was 5 years old, and my mom, she wanted me to go to the funeral. My grandmother, my dad's mom, didn't want me to. She didn't think I'd understand. And it was kind of gruesome. Like, most of what's centered around it would have to have been the experiences with my mom, where my mom would tell me, I remember her telling me that she had nightmares with her mom headless, in the corner in a rocking chair, covered in a white sheet. She had a recurring nightmare after that for a while. Like, it was very traumatic for her, and I think me being so young at the time didn't really grasp it, but it was something that always stuck with me. And my mom actually told me that she went to the court hearing where the guy was, I don't even know the terms, the guy was put up for jail or whatever, and she saw him, and she had to be detained. She was kicked out of the courtroom because she hopped over the bench and went to strangle him, the guy that did what he did to her mom. So that was, I can't even fathom what that would be like, but it was pretty traumatic event when I was younger. So my uncle Brian, nicknamed Pudgy, my mom's brother, shortly after my grandma was murdered, he got he was in jail. And he was in jail for many, many years. I think it was around when I was in grade 4, I think. I was in grade 4. Because he was not always in jail, but he ended up going to jail. And the thing that happened with him is a couple years, he was only in jail for a couple years, and he ended up dying in jail with an overdose of drugs. So it was suicide, I believe, in jail that he had committed. He used to keep these prison journal diaries, and I might actually still have one. But I'll never forget, in his prison journals, there was this poem. And I would later find out, maybe a couple years, the poem always stuck with me. And I would find it in a Stephen King novel a few years later. And I don't know if maybe my uncle saw the poem in the novel. I think it was Tommyknockers. But the poem read, "Oh, death, your hands are clammy. I feel them on my knees. You came and took my mother. Won't you come back after me?" And the day that I read that poem, the day that I found that same poem in a Stephen King novel, it just shook me to the core. Because my uncle did die by suicide a few years after my grandma was murdered. So my mom herself has had to deal with a lot of death and a lot of tragedy, and of course that trickled down to me. Another death that happened, and we're veering off of the funerals, and was so my mom and dad, they divorced, and I was living with my dad for a while. And during the summer, I had a friend named Brandy. She lived in the outskirts of town, where her and I would go back and forth, where she'd come stay with me for a couple days, and then I'd go stay with her. And it was just something that we did. But this one particular weekend that I went over to my friend Brandy's, I got a phone call from my dad saying that he was going to be picking me up early. But he wouldn't tell me why. He just said, "Candy, we gotta go home. I gotta come pick you up." Okay. So Dad came and picked me up, and we were driving back home. But he stops, and he pulls over in the middle of on the way home. He pulls over and he parks. And he sits there for a moment and he says, "I'm so sorry." And I was like, "For what? Like, what's going on?" And he actually was crying. He told me that my cat had got run over and that we were going to bury it. And at first, it didn't really hit me at first. I was like, "What are you talking about?" So he goes out of the car, and he had the cat, I don't even remember what the cat's name was in the back, in the trunk, covered in a blanket, and showed me the cat. And that's when I burst into tears, because the cat was curled up in a little C shape, and there was entrails. And looking back at it now, really kind of makes me wonder why my father did this, like why he thought enough to, I don't know if it was compassion, or if he just wanted me to realize about death, or if he thought I wouldn't believe him, or maybe he felt guilty, maybe he was the person that ran over the cat. I'll never know to this day, but I'll never forget the image of my cat just, curled up how he was curled up, he was dead, and we buried him together, and then came home, and I think he treated me to pizza that night. But yeah, it stuck with me too, just the memory and the confusion of why my father was cutting my visit short with my friend, and why he he had kept the cat in the trunk and came to get me, and I don't know, like to this day I don't know, but I remember that did stick with me. My fourth death that I had to deal with was my grandfather. Now, I had been living in BC in foster care, and I get this call saying that Grandpa passed away, and it was very hard. It was very hard, but I didn't cry. I don't know why. I was kind of numb. And I had to, my foster family paid for me to fly down to Alberta, back home, because I was living in BC. And what had happened was Grandpa was supposed to be coming home for the Easter weekend, and the hospital made a mistake. They gave him a double dose of blood thinners, which eventually ended up killing him. And that was the worst part of it, was that when you are expecting somebody home, and then they don't come home, and it was the hospital's mistake. So I was very numb. During the funeral, when the eulogy was read, there was a line that said, "And he greatly loved his granddaughter who was in BC." I burst into tears. It was, it was personal, it was a message, and I burst into tears, and then I ended up crying on the way back from the funeral again. Yeah, it was hard. It was hard, but just the mention and the fact that it got really personal at that moment, I just couldn't hold it back anymore. Finally, the tears had come. A funny story about that is, and I think I've mentioned it in my story times before, that after Grandpa died and I eventually went back to BC, I kept on having dreams about him, and it really frightened me, actually, So I had this mirror where I had pictures in the window, in the mirror frame, and one night right before I went to bed, because the dreams were starting to get very reoccurring, I had said, "Grandpa, I love you, but please, can you not show up in my dreams anymore?" In the morning, when I woke up, there was his picture face down in front of the mirror. All the other pictures around the mirror were intact, except his were face down, and since that night, or that next morning, I haven't dreamt of my grandfather. So that was definitely whoa, okay. Another death, my great uncle, which would be my grandma's brother, Oscar. That one didn't really hit me at all. I wasn't really close to Oscar. Same with Wanda. With Wanda, though, my grandma's sister, I had a problem. I went to go see her on her dying bed, right? Like, she was very, very close to the end. And she didn't look the same. She was not how I remembered her. And I remember my husband was with me that day. It was maybe 3 or 4 years ago. I don't even remember. But I remember I went in and I couldn't even stay. I burst into tears. Later, my grandmother would tell me that upset her that I couldn't stay. Which, to this day, kind of... See, I love my grandma and all, like my dad's mom, but sometimes she says things that really don't make any sense. And this just goes back to when I was younger and when I got into a car accident. And she blamed me because we were going into Edmonton to one of my appointments. So, and my aunt blamed me too. It was really just weird. She's like, "No, it was your fault. You got into an accident." It's like, I wasn't the one driving. I wasn't the one that ran through the stop sign or didn't stop to look at the other lights, right? That's a whole other story. But my grandmother, yeah, she tells me a couple of years later, she's like, yeah, you really upset me because you couldn't stay. You know, you just left. I was like, yeah, I left in tears because I couldn't be around that. It made me uncomfortable seeing my great aunt like that. And then Lydia's death, again, my grandma's sister on my dad's, my grandma's mom on my dad's side, has been the most, actually not the most recent one. The thing is with Lydia, we were kind of close, but we weren't really. Her death didn't hit me that hard. The most recent death we had was my aunt's lover, Marvin. Now, the thing is with Marvin is my uncle and my aunt were married for 26 years. My aunt cheated on my uncle with Marvin. Marvin was my uncle's boss. They had an affair. She left my uncle while my uncle was still living with my grandmother. But either way, it was just for years, you know, kind of awkward, kind of. My aunt, to me, has always seemed to be kind of a materialistic person. I love her, she's family, but Image, to me, the impression that I get is Image is everything to her. Like, she's constantly getting new vehicles. She's constantly, oh, look at my fur jacket. Oh, look at how much weight I lost. And she actually really upset me this past Thanksgiving when she flat out said, boy, you're getting fat. Or I don't remember what she said, but it was for the whole family, and it was very rude. And I actually did reach out to her, and I said, you know what, that really hurt. I'm well aware that I've gained weight, but the fact that you pointed out in front of everybody was just distasteful and rude. Regardless, my aunt and I have had a very strained relationship, including, you know, her kicking me out of Grandma's house because she wanted to live there. She didn't want me to live there, but she wanted to live there. And I ended up going to Brooks, Alberta, and I ended up getting into some trouble, and either way, you know, it almost felt to me like my aunt was a bit jealous of me. And now my aunt and my dad aren't talking. But that's its own thing. Going back to the topic of my story time, about how I deal with death. And the kind of death I've had in my life. So Sandy, my aunt, she messages me that she wants me to serve food for the reception. That's what she wanted me to do. Well, first she wanted me to come see Marvin, her lover. She wanted me to come visit him on his deathbed because he got diagnosed with cancer. And they gave him like a week to live. He managed to push a week into like 3 weeks or a month, I think it was. But he decided that he wanted to have assisted suicide in his home, in his chair. And, don't get me wrong, like, Marvin, you know, he wasn't a bad guy. Like, we didn't get into any arguments or anything, but I never saw him as part of the family. I mean, I just couldn't. So when Sandy asked me if I wanted to come see him, when he was, you know, he was really sick, he was supposed to be having the assisted suicide soon. And I just said, no, I'm sorry. And I could tell she was upset because she just responded in text, fine. I was like, it's not that, Well, I just said I didn't really know him, Sandy. I didn't have a connection with him. I feel uncomfortable, doing that kind of thing, right? It's like I don't have any connection to him whatsoever. Yeah, he was in our family for, I guess, 5 years, 5 or 6 years. But again, it's like you had an affair on my uncle with this guy. And this guy who had much more money than my uncle had gave her much more things than my uncle did, like materialistic things. And when you go from knowing how materialistic your aunt is to them leaving your uncle that you've known for like 26 years to be with this, have an affair and sneak around, and I mean, it was like, no, I don't want to, Sandy. It's not, no. So I didn't. I didn't go see him. I didn't pressure my husband to see him either. And at first and then for her to say, hey, can you work at the reception or whatever it's called, at the wake? Can you scoop food with Connie? At first I was like, maybe. And then I just flat out told her no. No, I'm working that weekend. I think I did end up working that weekend. So yeah, no, I didn't feel anything, because he wasn't my uncle. He just, and like, knock on wood, that's going to be the last death we have in the family. But I mean, getting back to how I first started the video, death is hard. Your death, your friend's death, but when you think about it, those people that you look up to, the celebs that you love, I think death is a real thing. It's 100% certain. You will eventually, and everybody around you will die. Everybody. It's a fact of life. And the important thing is just to, everybody's going to cope in their own way. And just because, someone, a friend of a friend or a family member, you don't see them crying or they don't look as upset as you'd expect them to, grieving process is very personal. And I think that's the most important thing to realize. Because chances are, once that person gets home, after everything is said and done, they're crying. They're grieving. They're doing what they need to do to work through it. And we're all going to go through it. And it's just, you just gotta, you just gotta deal. That's how you gotta do it. It's a fact of life. Anyway, I'm almost done 25 minutes, and this is going to wrap up this story time. To anybody that sat through this whole thing, thank you. I really appreciate it. I really appreciate you being here with me and just taking a moment to listen to my side, what I've been through and the kind of things that I've had to face. Alright, all you shining stars, have a shining star day, and we will see you next Saturday for another What's the Soup. Bye.